People hated Microsoft because they were a monopoly. All the PCs had Microsoft Windows, so you had to pay Microsoft Windows. They're not innovating anymore. They're just asking us for money. And then it went downhill for Microsoft.
What is something that has really shocked you in the recent times?
Bill Gates didn't allow his wife to have an iPad. Microsoft hated Apple. During that period, he fired 14% of the people that worked at Microsoft. And who did he fire?
Is there a framework to find Phoenix opportunities?
I think there's a framework to make them happen. If you're running a big company, you feel that there's a Phoenix moment rapidly approaching, then you need to build that sense of urgency. So many companies have failed because there was not that sense of urgency. I have seen 4 big movements in my career: the World Wide Web, smartphone, the cloud, and now AI.
When ChatGPT 4.0 launched the same day, Duolingo lost around $3 million or $4 million in their market cap.
I think the power of AI to be a force of disruption in many business models is absolutely there.
How can I leverage this AI opportunity?
Just helping us write our science essays or our papers, that's not the best use of artificial intelligence. Walmart, they acquired Flipkart here in India. 10 years ago, they were going down. And then what happened in a certain moment is Walmart panicked.
When do you think it's the right time to sell a business?
It was very strange being fired from your own startup. I remember packing my stuff into a cardboard box, walking out. All my friends were there watching that moment. We would just say Google and people said, oh, wow. Now people say, I work at Google, and they say, oh, we're so sorry for you.
In India, people are fascinated about creating unicorns. What are your sources of learning? So, for example, for me, there are basically 4. I have been an avid traveler. So, I've traveled the country. It's so vast, you can't claim to travel in entirety, but you tend to cover whatever you can cover, different things. So, one source for me is through learning, through traveling. The other source of learning is through reading books. The third one is basically meeting and talking to people. That's a very important thing. And the fourth thing is my shower. So whenever I'm into shower, I get so many ideas. Whenever I'm traveling or driving, I just reflect upon, and sometimes good ideas come in your sleep also. But I find it very hard to remember my sleep, my dreams.
Yeah,
are you able to?
Well, I mean, for me, it's so one of the perks of the job that I have now, if you can call it a job, is that I get invited to a lot of conferences. Mm-hmm. And what is really, really interesting is that I try to listen to other speakers. And maybe 80 to 90% of the speakers are, I'm not impressed. But there is 10%, 20% that I think, wow, they have given me a perspective, or they have triggered something, or they have shown me something that I had never picked up. So that's, for me, something that I find really, really valuable to as a source. And the second is probably related to your last method is I don't, July and August, this is very rare for me to come here. Normally, I don't travel in July and August.
So then what happened with
What happened is they had invited me for a conference in Singapore, but that got postponed or whatever. And then they said, could you come to our event in New Delhi? Yeah. And that's the reason why I'm here. Normally, I would never do this. And I spent 2 months on our farm. We have a farm.
Okay.
And my wife's a veterinarian. And then for 2 months, I work on the farm in Belgium. Yeah. And that could be everything from driving our tractor, making hay, to fixing things. And I love to work with wood. And I'm a woodworker. And very similar, when I'm working with wood, it clears your mind. And the moment that your mind is clear, then it gets filled with ideas. And for me, that is the perfect way to actually, reflect.
Interesting. Basically, I feel so lucky that, you were mentioning that it's never supposed to happen, but it's finally happening. I'm so glad. Again, thanks for doing this. So, do you find India, you mentioned that this is your second time in India.
Oh, no, I've been in India plenty of times. But it depends. Sometimes there's a year where I don't get to India, and sometimes there's a year where there's 2 or 3 times that I get to India. So it really depends. Yeah.
And in this conference, who were some top 10 or 1 or 2 speakers that actually said something interesting which stuck on your mind?
So there was yesterday, but I can't recall the name. But I attended the opening session. And the opening session...
Ronnie Screwwala, upgrade?
It was Ronnie. And Ronnie said a couple of very interesting things. One of the things he said, if you look at your life, there might be 4 or 5 choices that you make that actually determine maybe 80% of your life's journey. And these are junctions in your life where you have to make a decision. That could be,
career, marriage
or study that you take, or maybe your first employer. But it triggered me to say, okay, what would the 4 or 5 choices be in my life that really shaped the journey to where I am, or the choices that I took? And it was something that I'd never thought about it like that. And it was he said it in such a simple way. And I thought, wow, that is really, really cool. I'm gonna reflect on that. Maybe even use it myself, when I'm working with the group, to say, okay, what are the 4 or 5 choices? And a very interesting second question is, how many choices do you have left? Which is a fascinating way to look at it.
What are some choices, or this is so interesting, what were some choices and, decisions that were life-changing, or I would say that had an orbital impact on your life curve?
For me, it was very simple. I think apart from the obvious one where I studied to become an engineer, that's I think a really important one. Even today, the fact that I have that technical background gives me such comfort to say, in the world of AI, to separate hype from reality. And that is, I think, crucial. The second choice that I would say wasn't even my choice, but my father, he's an engineer himself, and he started working for Exxon. And he was offered an assignment in the US, and he took it. And when I was 6 years old, we moved to the US, and I lived in the US until I was 16. And 10 very formative years. And that probably gave me a perspective, gave me insights, helped me with the language. And I think I didn't have a say in that choice, but in hindsight, it was a very good choice because I really benefited from that. But maybe the most important choice that, probably when I graduated, I started working for a big French company called Alcatel. They were a telecoms infrastructure company. And this is 1993, so a long time ago. This is pre-World Wide Web. So the World Wide Web erupted in 94, beginning of 95. This is when most people even heard about the World Wide Web for the first time. And I became fascinated by that technology. And I taught myself how to build websites. And at a certain moment, I had worked all night debugging a website. I looked terrible. I came out of the elevators when I just came to the office, and the boss of my boss saw me coming out of the elevator. He said, "Could you come into my office?" And he sat me down and he said, "Are you on drugs?" And I said, No, I'm very sorry. I look terrible, but I'm completely hooked on the World Wide Web. And he said, "What's the World Wide Web?" And this was like a warning light. He was the head of the research for a telecoms company. He'd never seen the World Wide Web. And then for the next hour and a half, I show him what I'm doing. And then he said, "This is never going to work. This is Mickey Mouse stuff. If I could give you one advice, quit that, stupid World Wide Web. It's never going to work. Focus on your real job." And I remember going back to my cubicle And while I was going back from his office to my cubicle, I said, I'm going to leave. I'm going to resign because I really believe that this World Wide Web has potential. And I quit that very same day. And everybody thought I was crazy. My parents thought, what are you doing? You know? My colleagues said, are you out of your mind? You've got a great job at a great company. You're making good money. Why? You know? And I think in hindsight, that was a choice I made based on my instincts, based on my gut feeling, based on my beliefs. And I think it was the best choice I ever made because it got me, completely focused on online. It got me focused on an entrepreneurial career because what else was I going to do? And it was about giving me a taste to seek out things that might be still in its infancy, but that you feel have great potential. And I think that is a taste that, has never failed me. Yeah.
So many things. But, you mentioned that I'll come to this point of having a conviction about something. Which is extremely opposite to the common belief. When everybody is saying you that you're mad, but you still pick something up and that you're a contrarian and you eventually turn out to be right, which is an amazing space. Because most of the time, sometimes contrarian people also go wrong, right? But you were contrarian and you were right. We'll talk about this. But I know it will be difficult for you to answer this. I don't know, because 10 years, very formative years, before 16 you were in US and you mentioned you got a lot of insights and perspectives. From hindsight, can you help us? How did the country US shaped you, sir?
So, as I said, I was 6 years old when we moved to the US. And in the beginning, we lived in the deep South in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Okay.
And that is the very heart of the oil business in the U.S. because Louisiana, or underneath Louisiana, is a big part of the oil reserves. It used to be conquered by the Standard Oil Company, which then became Exxon, where my father worked. When I was about 11, we moved to California, Southern California, Irvine, Orange County, and what I experienced even as a child is that the huge contrast between the deep South, which is rural, and then California was like day and night. And that's, even today, I live in Europe. People in Europe say, oh, the Americans. And I say, you have no idea. I mean, between the Midwest or the Deep South or California, even Southern California and Northern California are completely different.
Stark difference.
Quite different points of views, mindsets. As you know, the big divide between the coastal cities and the interior of the U.S. And I think if you want to really understand the United States, you have to understand that complexity, that diversity. On the other hand, I then went back to Europe. And of course, I am European. I love Europe. But if you really want to understand Europe, my God, I also hate it when Americans talk about Europeans. There is no European. I mean, a German is completely different from somebody from France, completely different from somebody from, say, Italy. Even in Italy, the difference between the south of Italy and the north of Italy is day and night. The north of Italy is industrious, and it's where you have manufacturing and you have entrepreneurs. South of Rome is a completely different mentality. And that's what I think, gave me a perspective, not just on the US, but also to really try to understand. When I come to here, to India, I mean, as I mentioned, I've only seen
Kolkata, Bombay, a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. But even trying to understand what the difference is between, say, New Delhi or Kolkata is fascinating for me. Yeah? And that's, I think, the type of nuances that I got as a young boy that has probably given me a taste that whenever I go somewhere, I try to really, really understand what is the unique difference, what is the unique signature that you have in a city, in a region. And, I love the way that this correlates with culture and mindset. And I think that is, for me, one of the most fascinating things to explore.
Interesting. Can you tell me this one mindset or one insight about Belgium for the people for watching this who want to understand, who are interested in Belgium, and one difference from a limited, exposure to India?
Yeah, no. I'd be happy to. So Belgium is a very special place because it's an artificial country. So Belgium was created by the British in 1830. There was no Belgium before 1830. And the British, which, have quite a reputation for
Being everywhere.
and reshaping, politics and cultures. In 1830, the British said, we don't trust the French. We don't trust the Germans. Let's put a country in between, like a buffer, and we'll call it Belgium. And they just drew on a map and said, we'll call this Belgium. And then they said, we think it should be a monarchy. Let's find a king. And they found an unemployed nobleman in Germany. And they said, do you want to be king of Belgium? And he said, yeah, sure. Yeah, but that is why even today, there is very little cultural adhesion within Belgium. So the northern part speaks Dutch, like the Netherlands. The southern part speaks French, like in France. But the difference between the northern and the southern part, they don't feel connected at all. I mean, only on rare occasions when we would win, a medal at the Olympics, then you might have a little bit of a Belgian feeling. But apart from that, Belgium is an artificial creation.
Interesting. And what about India? What have you observed? Anything interesting which has shocked you about the country, or which we need to improve on, or which you learned and go back to Belgium and teach your friends?
I'll say something really stupid. What always fascinates me when I come here is the moment that I get out of the airport, I have never heard so much honking, of the cars. And after 3 days, I get used to it. Yeah, I think it's normal. Yeah? And now I go back to Belgium and I think it's so quiet on the road. Nobody honks.
Interesting. Super interesting. I think this is a very good segue into, I would love to, touch upon your journey of, 3 startups. One was acquired. The other one was acquired by Vodafone. And third was actually IPO'd, if I'm not wrong. You left your first company. You figured out this thing called World Wide Web, right? And you had to actually be, an entrepreneur to start something of your own.
Yeah.
What was the thing? Was this your first company? Alcatel-Lucent?
Well, so what happened is when I left Alcatel to start my own company, it was almost out of necessity because I had given up a good job at a respectable company. And I was fascinated by the technology and I thought, what can I do with this? And this was the very, very early days of the internet when I still had to convince people that maybe a website would be an interesting thing. But in the region that I worked in Belgium, we already had 2 companies that were building websites. And I thought, I don't want to be number 3, So I started thinking, hey, can we start to have other uses for this technology? And one of the interesting things was to use that technology, not to build a website, which is like an external facing, but to use that technology in the company, in the organization. And then, we didn't have a name for it, but later that became something that we called an intranet, which is basically using web technology inside companies. And I said, hey, that's an opportunity. And then I was quickly shaped by that in the sense that we started building intranets for companies. And, where a website was almost like a brochure that is just outside, the internal were much more application driven because they said, we have this Oracle database. Could you connect the intranet to the Oracle database? Or we have an SAP ERP system. Could you connect that to that? And then we actually started hiring a lot of engineers who had knowledge of these systems. And we became much more of a system integrator where most of the website builders were just honestly more marketing and communications. And we became much more trying to figure out how to connect all these processes inside organizations. The company grew quite rapidly. I think we grew to about 400 people in 4 years' time. So I ended up recruiting everybody I knew from university. All my friends worked there at a certain moment. And then we got an offer from my first employer, Alcatel, to buy us. Alcatel said, well, you were right about this World Wide Web. Can we buy your company? And I made the terrible mistake of doing that. I sold my company to Alcatel, and I had this naive idea that, we're 400 people, but Alcatel is 400,000 people, and we work for J&J. They work for J&J. Hey, why don't we combine it? But then I quickly realized that what we were doing is for J&J, the pharmaceutical giant, we were building, mechanisms for document management where they could share, how to market the pharmaceuticals worldwide. And Alcatel was selling phones, and the mismatch between their sales capacity and our products was a disaster. So I had a 2-year earnout, and I got fired after 6 months. I sold my company, and I was very happy for a very short period of time.
How big was the deal if you are able to?
It was, this is back in 1999, so you have to think about it. But I think we sold the company, and I was still, 60% shareholder of the company. And let me say I had financial independence as a result of that deal. And what was interesting is that I really believe that it wasn't about just making money. It was about trying to build something that was bigger. And I was very disappointed for 2 reasons. One is I completely felt that the company that had acquired us didn't have the capacity to really leverage and sell our products. 2, I was completely devastated by the amount of control mechanisms that were imposed on us. To give you an idea, financial controls, HR, all of a sudden,
You lose control.
I had all these people who were telling me how to run my business. And I thought, honestly, I'm a startup of 400 people, I'm not 400,000. And on top of that, they were French, and French are very sticklers for rules. And I got into a fight with somebody who came all the way from Paris, stormed into my office and said, there's a huge problem with your car policy. We have a car policy as a French company that they have to be Citroëns and Renaults and you have BMWs, and that is not allowed. You have to change all your cars. And I basically got very mad, threw him out of my office. And that was enough to basically, let me go. And it was very strange being fired from your own startup, from your own company. I remember packing my stuff into a cardboard box, walking out, and everybody that I had recruited, all my friends were there watching that moment. The result is 6 months later, my startup was dead. They were unable to keep that spirit alive. And this is where I really felt that there was a huge mismatch on how a large corporate and a small startup could actually work together. I've later written quite a lot about it in my books, and I call it, the problem between the rainforest and the plantation. The big companies are plantations. They have figured out what the crop is that has the most yield, and then boom. And this is the rules of the plantation. If you are a banana plantation, you wake up every morning, you think, bananas. And you think about bananas, you have meetings about bananas, you write emails about bananas, and you have strategic offsites about banana budget next year. But startups, they live in the rainforest. The rainforests are scary places. You can die in the rainforest. A spider, boom, you're dead. Snake, boom, you're dead. But why are startups so crazy enough to live in the rainforest? It's because the venom of the spider that kills you could be the cure for cancer. It's the magic of the rainforest. And what happens is, if somebody in the plantation says, you know what? All we do is bananas. Look, there's something in the rainforest. Why don't we buy them? And if you buy something that's lived in the rainforest all its life and you drag it into the banana plantation, it dies. And that complexity of how big companies can actually understand how to leverage the power of startups, that has been one of the really important research areas that I focused on.
Super interesting. I want to go and continue this to your Steve Jobs moment. When Steve Jobs was fired, he came back, with Pixar and actually, took the reins at Apple back. And I'm sure that it might, there is something similar in your life story as well, because you started in a company, then third company. But before that, I want to understand. So in fact, I was recently talking to a private equity person. He runs a very good, famous, big, $1 billion PE firm. And he was mentioning about how majority of acquisitions fail, right? And this is one of the reasons. The person you're talking about, Ronnie, he is also, what he is doing is only taking care of how do you manage acquisitions. So I was talking to Mayank and asked, what is the part of business that Ronnie handles? And he handles only this because Upgrade in 2 years did 16 acquisitions, right? It's a $1 billion startup and they ended up he just helped with the integration and, how comforting the founder that they have acquired. But I want to understand and go deep with the perspective of a potential founder. When it's right, when do you think it's the right time to sell a business? What are some good metrics? And if you end up selling the business, how to make the acquisition right? How to leverage those rainforests and actually flourish those in your big plantation? And tell us with two perspectives. One, with the perspective of the acquirer, and one, with the perspective of, let's say, how old were you when you were getting acquired?
I was started the business at 25, 29. Yeah.
And as a young 29-year-old person who's running a startup and then gets a call or, from a big company that we want to acquire, how do you do that? Help me with both of the perspectives.
Well, as I said, I find this a really fascinating area. And of course, if you do a startup, then you can die in so many ways, right? I mean, even going from idea 0 to 1, the odds against you are insane. When you have actually started a business, you have competition, which is at your throat. Your cash is running out. You have to go from funding round to funding round. So if you add that up, as you know, the failure rates of startups is, huge. But then suppose that you are a successful startup that gets an exit, right? That is like amazing. You have beaten all the odds. But the sad part of it is the moment that you do that exit, then the chances that it's going to go down are even worse. And I'll never forget. So when I sold my first company to Alcatel, 3 months later, I got an invitation from the CFO to come down to Paris for a weekend. And they had a very nice venue. I come into the lobby of that venue and I immediately see, oh my God, these are all the companies that Alcatel has acquired over the last 5 years. All the startup founders were there, or the people that were running the acquisitions. And the CFO puts us in a big meeting room and says, well, I've summoned you here because there is something terribly wrong. We've acquired all of you, and you're all terrible acquisitions. So what happened? And then he got, boom, all of the anger of all these startup founders who were complaining about the complexity of making it happen. They didn't do that mismatch. And that's just where I started to realize that when I was younger, I had this naive idea that if you're a big company, you must be so sophisticated. And a startup, it's always trouble. There's always mystery. There's always misery. There's always something going wrong. And when I was a startup, I thought, oh, my God, I wish I could work in a big company where everything is professional and organized. And I realized it isn't. Sometimes these acquisitions happen because they have a hunch or they have a feeling, but it's not because it's a well thought out strategic pattern. Now, what is fascinating is that I later on became focused very much on big companies and their capability of reinvention. I wrote a book on that called The Phoenix and the Unicorn. And the big example for me was Walmart, because I had been invited to Walmart, and Walmart was one of those companies that was epic, because they are the biggest company in the world. The size of it is just mind-boggling. And first I didn't want to go because I thought, maybe they're old school. But then I fell in love with the company. And for me, it's a phoenix. It's a company that's been reinventing itself over and over again. But, when you look today, Walmart, they acquired Flipkart here in India. They are now, I think, in the US, one of the leading players in everything that is digital and online. But 10 years ago, they were going down. And then what happened in a certain moment is Walmart panicked. And they said, we're going to lose against Amazon. We have to buy and acquire a startup. And they acquired a big e-commerce player in the US called Jet.com. They paid $3.8 billion for Jet.com. And they thought, great, that's it. We're the traditional retailer. They are the e-commerce retailer. Case solved. What happened is 2.5 years later, they said, well, that completely failed. They had to write off the $3.8 billion acquisition and start over again. And for me, that was fascinating because I really wanted to get to the root cause. And it goes back to what we talked about earlier, that Plantation and Rainforest. The culture, the rules of the Rainforest and the rules of the Plantation are fundamentally different. And when Walmart acquired Jet.com, Walmart is based in the very heart of the US, in Bentonville, Northwest Arkansas, about as remote as you can get. But then they acquired Jet.com, which were a bunch of arrogant New Yorkers. They were kids who had built an e-commerce platform and were very cocky about that. But the culture clash between people from the Midwest and New York, people who were traditional retailers and e-commerce, it was a clash of epic proportions. And it wasn't because there was a technological issue or even an organizational issue. The most important thing is mindset and culture. And, for Walmart, it basically meant, okay, write off, start again. And then they realized instead of buying our way into the future, we have to change the big boat. They had to change the big oil tanker. They thought by buying a couple of speedboats, they could get away. No, they had to change the big boat. And for me, that was absolutely fascinating. But the rule I take back from that is if you don't focus on the cultural dimensions when you do an acquisition, you're almost completely 100% sure to fail. And the companies who have done it right are the ones who are capable of really understanding that cultural fit. I'll give you one example. Disney. Disney is a phoenix. Disney is 100 years old. Now Disney is top of their game, but 15 years ago, Disney was going down. They were not relevant anymore to a younger generation. They had a very old style mentality. Their portfolio was kind of drying up. And then they acquired a couple of companies. They acquired Pixar. They acquired Marvel. They acquired Lucasfilm, Star Wars Empire. And for me, it was one of those examples where they really understood the cultural element of that. And when Disney bought Pixar, they could have easily said, okay, we're now Disney. You're all Disney employees. No, they kept a lot of that spirit of Pixar intact. They realized that these were people who had skills that they didn't have anymore at Disney. And they really saw it not just as an acquisition, but almost like a transformation, almost like a transfusion, where some of the culture of Pixar actually was transfused into the culture of Disney. And Disney, for me, has been one of those examples where time and time again, whenever they do an acquisition, they don't come in and destroy. They come in and they absorb. And that means that they have an enormous amount of nuance when it comes to that cultural dimensions of acquisition. So back to your question, I really believe that if you're a startup founder and you want to exit and you just want to have a shitload of money, you don't care. But if you want your baby to live on, try and find that partner that is sensitive for that cultural dimension of an acquisition.
There's so many things I want to go deep on. I'll touch the Phoenix opportunities that you explained, because in India, people are fascinated about creating unicorns. And,
Well, not just in India, all around the world.
I'll come to that. But before that, I want to really understand this. What are those cultural dimensions? Help us understand that. And what's the right way of actually transfusing, actually absorbing, or actually get absorbed the right way?
I think every case is different, right? But I'll give one dimension of that. When you look at an acquisition of a big player and a smaller player, so like a Walmart acquiring Jet.com or a Disney acquiring Pixar, the people who work in these institutions often have fundamentally different ideas why they belong to that organization. The people who, for example, work at Walmart or work at Disney, they chose that because they seem like very stable employers. Those are companies that have been around for decades. Those are companies where you have a well-defined career path. Those are companies that have organization and structure, where if you want to grow to the ranks, you will have a learning and development department that is going to help you, and you have career officers and HR that is going to guide you. But the people that are in the small startups, they never joined because of those reasons. They didn't join Pixar because they had a great career path. No, they joined because they were unique in their skill, or because they were very proud of what they were doing. They were artisans or craftsmen or people who just loved the challenge to be there. And that is one of those cultural dimensions, right? When you acquire a company, you acquire not just products and services, you acquire people. And if you cannot find a mechanism to transform their passion and their commitment and their engagement into that larger structure, you have to understand why they actually tick, what makes them tick. When I joined London Business School, I was actually asked to join London Business School by a man called Rob Goffey. But he was the associate dean of London Business School at the time. And he's an organizational behavioralist and a psychologist. He looks at organizational cultural patterns, and very far removed from my reality as an engineer. But I became fascinated by his work. And he wrote a very interesting book. And he actually wrote a book called How to Lead Clever People. And what he observed is that if you take an environment where you have really, really clever people, right? That could be a tech company where you have brilliant programmers. Or one of the examples he always gives is a pharmaceutical company. In a pharmaceutical company, you might have 50,000 employees, but actually there is going to be 35 brilliant chemists who are making the drugs of the future. And you can take the 50,000 employees and have a very standard way of working with them from an HR point of view, but that will not work for the 35 people, because these 35, they don't care about an org chart. They don't care about a career plan. They're not motivated by the same things. They're often not even motivated by salary. What is important for these 35 is when they go to a conference and they meet their peers, that they can show that they are smarter than the other guys. And Rob Goffey realized that if you're a pharmaceutical company, you have to treat those 35 brilliant, clever people different than the 50,000 other people. And I found a lot of truth in that when you look at that Rainforest and Plantation. If you are Disney or Walmart with 1.6 million people, and you are going to acquire a startup where some of the really, really important tech talent doesn't care about, in which org chart, or if they're an SVP or an EVP. They don't care what's on their business card. What they care about is that they can do their magic, that they can perform things that are truly amazing, where they get respect from a community or peers, or where they have a leverage potential. They're not going to get into a world where it's all about politics and bureaucracy and ranks or file. And that is one of those dimensions of the cultural nuances that you have to get right if you want to do acquisitions in the right way.
How can I have two different cultures at the same time? What's the right way to, transfuse? Because people will see, okay, these people have different tools. We have different tools. Because that's very clear from both the perspectives, right? So how do you bridge the gap?
But it's always a transition. Right? It's something where over time you really want to harmonize this. But if you do that too quickly, you're going to break it. And I'll give you a very practical example. And a practical example that happened to me. I mean, when our first startup, my first startup, 400 people, was acquired by Alcatel, they didn't understand that timing. So from day one, they said, oh, we have great news for you because you're just 400 people, right? And we are 400,000. And we can procure things at a much cheaper rate because we have
the power of economy.
And I thought, wow, that's amazing. You know? I mean, we were always, if we wanted to go to Microsoft or Oracle and, you know, the negotiations, Oracle would say, oh, there's a little startup and we don't care about you. We were always really, you know, it was a complex thing to do. And I thought, my God, I'm now going to have the procurement department of a 400,000 person organization and a leverage power and a bargaining power that is insane. But what happened, on the contrary, is that my engineers who would come into my office and say, boss, we've got a problem here. We got to solve it. We found something here online. Could you just give us your credit card and we want to buy it right away? And I would do that. That's the agility of a startup.
Exactly.
From day one, when we were acquired, we had to go through procurement. And it would take us 7 weeks just to get an approval to be able to buy something. So although we had the economy of power, we lost all our agility and flexibility. And in the beginning, I think you don't want to risk that you go too fast. Over time, of course it makes sense. You don't want two different kinds of citizens in one company, or even, you know, you don't want one procurement for the fast guys and one procurement. No, in the end, but getting that timing right, that is something where you have to respect how you're going to work it. And look at Disney and Pixar. Over time, it's one company.
What's the approximate, that critical point of time? Is it 1 year, 2 years, 3 years?
I don't think you can just say it's that. It really depends. It's case by case. It depends on the company, the organization, the culture, etc. One of the things that Disney also did, which I think was brilliant, is they didn't replace the head of creative of Pixar with a Disney guy. No, they actually took the head of creative and said, you know what? We think you should run creative for all of Disney because you guys are clearly better at this than us. That's the type of things that require guts from the acquirer to be able to do something like that. But it gets so much buy-in and you can create so much, enthusiasm from both sides that if you work that right, you can create something which is unique.
Interesting. It's a good time to change your head.
Okay.
We're ahead of a 22-year-old person who is fascinated about, building unicorn, building the next big business, right? Now teach me, how can I find Phoenix opportunities?
So let me just maybe put it in perspective. So when I had the chance to do a couple of startups when I was younger, and then I kind of got tired of that. And the reason is that startups are very, very engaging, very intense, dangerous. I did 3 startups back to back over a 15-year period. First one acquired by Alcatel, second by Vodafone, third was an IPO. And in hindsight, I think if I would have done a 4th one, I think it would have destroyed a lot of things. I was so completely busy with the startup life that I neglected my family, I neglected social, I neglected my health. And I always joke, if I would have done a 4th one, it would be like the Vietnam veterans, where you do a 4th tour of duty and you end up on a beach in Mexico drinking mezcal with a worm in it. That could have been my destiny. I didn't do that. And it was partly because I had a very candid conversation with my wife. We said, hey, you've done 3 startups, you have 2 kids, you spend more time on the startups than our kids. What do you want to do in life? And I think it was a very difficult period for me because startups are exhilarating and they are electrifying. But it's like a drug, right? You can get addicted. And I quit that life. I started teaching at London Business School, started writing books. And I was fascinated because at London Business School, the people I had there were often senior executives, people who were running big divisions of big companies who would come to London Business School for programs like the Senior Executive Program, 4-week program, intense, and I would love to work with them. And what was fascinating is I realized I had nothing in common with these people, nothing, right? Because I had done the startup life. The people, these executives that they were running like $1 billion category for Nestle or $1 billion business for, I don't know, Mercedes or Audi. These were people who had graduated, joined Mercedes, grown through the ranks, and all their life they had worked in corporate life. And I had never worked in corporate life except the very, little period before I did my startups. And I started to realize we come from completely different worlds. And what was fascinating for me is all of these people that were in my class, they had one thing that they wanted to learn from me, how to be more innovative. Because they said, you know what, you've been in these startups all your life, and startups are so innovative, they can do things so quickly. And in our company, it takes ages to get anything done. What is the magic? And I realized I couldn't just show them how a startup worked, because you could not just translate that to a traditional corporation. You could not take, the story of Uber or Airbnb and hope that that would magically rub off on a bank or an insurance company. It wouldn't work that way. So I became fascinated by companies who can reinvent themselves. And that became my fascination for phoenixes. And when I wrote the book, Walmart was a phoenix, because Walmart was 70 years old, 1.6 million employees, and reinventing themselves at a pace that I had never seen. And then when I wrote the book, The Phoenix and the Unicorn, I then became fascinated and started researching even more. And then I found that, Walmart is a phoenix, Disney is a phoenix, Microsoft is a phoenix. And Microsoft is a great example. They're 50 years old, startup, scale up, unicorn even before the word unicorn existed. And then they became a monopoly, right? I remember around the year 2000, people hated Microsoft because they were a monopoly, because all the PCs had Microsoft Windows, so you had to pay Microsoft Windows. Everybody was using Microsoft Word and PowerPoint, so you had to pay for Microsoft Office. And people said, you know what? They're not innovating anymore. They're just asking us for money. And then it went downhill for Microsoft. About 10 years ago, Microsoft was in bad shape. They were basically collecting fees, but were not innovating anymore. I don't remember who said it, but someone said there are 8 Googles inside of Microsoft, but they're not getting out anymore because Microsoft had become a boring monopoly and a bureaucracy, which was turning out horrible, mediocre products. And then Satya Nadella came on board, and Satya is one of those miraculous recoveries. Satya is almost like, he's like a messiah, where he came in a company that most people said, done, and he revived it, not because, he brought in technology, they had technology, not because he brought in engineers, they had engineers, but he brought in a different spirit, a different mentality, a different approach. Satya completely shifted everything to the cloud, great strategic move, and then he applied Carol Dweck's growth mindset and said, instead of seeing everything as a problem, we should look at every challenge as an opportunity. And that sounds very soft, but he really made it work. And today, Microsoft is probably one of the most important companies in the world, one of the most valuable companies in the world. The amount of stock market recovery that has happened since Satya Nadella is insane. And for me, it's a great example of a phoenix. It's a company that has difficulties. It's a company with history, with battle scars, with legacy, that is capable of reinventing itself. And I became fascinated by that. I became fascinated because I think there are more potential phoenixes than there are unicorn opportunities. We have become fascinated by unicorns in the last 10 years. And that's because, of course, the idea to go from zero to $1 billion valuation is mesmerizing. And thanks to technology and network effects, we can now make that happen. But I think after a decade of unicorn applause, I think we might be ready for a decade of phoenix opportunities. And that is very interesting because, first of all, from a financial point of view, I mean, unicorns is very closely related to venture capital. Right? Venture capitalists make big bets where failure is a normal mechanism, and it's basically just trying to beat the odds. Unicorns are one element tied to VC. Phoenixes, I think, are much more tied to the way private equity works. Because private equity takes a business that maybe is stalling a little bit and then is capable of leveraging that, and boom, turning it into a better version of themselves. And of course, you have the stories that a lot of private equity is just milking it dry and just, but I've seen quite a lot of opportunities where you actually build something that has really significant higher value. What I find most interesting is that in my research, I found a lot of phoenixes that are related to family businesses. And Walmart is publicly traded, but the Walton family still has the controlling stake. And what I found there is that, yes, of course they care about this fiscal quarter and this financial year, but they're much more concerned about still being relevant for the next generation or even the generation after that. And that has been something that I found fascinating. I'll give another example. One of my favorite phoenixes is a company called Hermès, the French luxury player. So you walk into an airport, you will see an Hermès shop. It's a company which is the 7th generation family business. But it is, depending on the day of the week, the most valuable company in the French economy. And it's an extremely interesting story. So the origin of this company, it's more than 185 years old. And it started by the founder, Monsieur Hermès, and he had a crazy idea. He wanted to be the best luxury saddle maker in Paris. So he said, all these noblemen, we should do something unique for them. And he had this brilliant idea to say, I'm going to be the #1 French luxury saddle maker in Paris. Did that. His son takes over. What does the second generation typically do?
They kind of, take it to global, make it grow more big, grow. Scale.
So son takes over and says, okay, what did my dad do? He built the #1 French luxury saddle maker. All the Parisian nobility go to Hermès to have their saddle made. I'm going to scale it. I want to become the European luxury saddle maker. And that's what he did. By the end of his reign, Hermès had become the #1 European luxury saddle maker. And, noblemen from Italy and Germany came to Paris to have their saddle made. What does the third generation typically do? They screw things up. That's the curse of the family. I mean, third generation typically squanders everything. It's statistically proven that is the case. So the third generation takes over and says, hey, before I do that, I want to spend some time to savor the world, see what is happening. So he goes to America. And this is the early 1900s. He goes to America, the new continent at that time. He goes to New York and he sees two things. First of all, he sees the first automobile. And the moment he sees the automobile, he says, I'm not sure horses are the future. No? We're making saddles for horses. I don't think this is going to work anymore. If this automobile thing actually works, we are gone. No? The second thing he sees, and it was the invention of 1911, and it was the zipper. We now take the zipper for granted, but in 1911, the zipper was invented. He saw that and he thought, oh my God, yeah? And by the time he got back to Paris, he had the exclusive rights to use the zipper, which was a US invention, on European continents. So imagine the grandson of the founder, after spending 2 years in America, he comes back, he flings open the doors of the saddle maker in Paris and he says, "Stop with the saddles, horses are dead. And by the way, look at this." Imagine that. Yeah? And this is one of those pivotal moments. And I have looked at that history of Hermès, and they have been reinventing themselves over and over again. And, today, what is the number one problem Hermès has, do you think?
I think, it's so exclusive that they are out of stock, maybe.
The problem is a lot of their products are leather.
So they are not actually eco-friendly.
So they're not eco-friendly.
They're lagging on extremely low ESG values, something like that.
I mean, they now think that there could be a scenario where maybe a few generations from now, the idea of wearing a bag made out of dead cows is not a good idea. Yeah? So they are now one of the main investors in leather alternatives. They have huge investments in mycelium plants, which are basically mushrooms. And the flagship product of Hermès is a Jane Birkin bag. They can now offer you a mycelium Birkin bag, which is even more expensive than the dead cow variant, which I think is fascinating. So this is what I love. You have this spirit, and you often have that in family businesses capable of reinventing themselves. Now, going back to your original question, if you're 22 years old and you can do a unicorn, go do it. Huh? But I think doing a startup is tough. Getting an idea off the ground is hard work. And you're going to be struggling for a couple of years where you're constantly going to think, what the hell have I done? Yeah? And the chances that you will succeed are very, very slim. But I think today you might have an opportunity in traditional companies where you can use the power of market share, where you have capital at your disposal, where you have the means to scale something maybe faster than you can do in a unicorn. And there's two elements to that. One is if you are running a traditional company, owning a traditional company, can you see the value of bringing in young people and giving them that opportunity? And second of all, I really believe that what is your motivation in life? If your motivation in life is to make money, then, okay, a unicorn is an interesting alternative. But if your motivation is to do something which has impact, then I think there are so many Phoenix opportunities where you can leverage the scale and have global impact or faster impact because you have mechanisms to make that happen that are truly interesting to explore.
I was reading this, interesting article I'm forgetting about Facebook, how the company is pivoting towards the meta thing. What do you call that?
The metaverse?
Yes, the metaverse, right? Actually becoming a virtual reality company, something like that. Do you consider Facebook a Phoenix till now? And do you think Facebook turning their focus can lead to becoming a Phoenix? Do you have views on that?
Well, what is fascinating is that when you look at the big tech players of today, we have seen them over the last 20, 25 years go from idea to startup to unicorn to big tech. What is now interesting is that a lot of these companies get into a stage of life where their necessity to reinvent themselves is higher than ever. And I'll take, maybe not Facebook, but I will take Google as an example. I've done a lot of work with Google, and Google is 25 years old. The first 23 years at Google were just go, go, go. Go, 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 right? It was whatever they did, go. Huh? I mean, it was relatively easy to work at Google in those days because people loved Google, right? If they were at an event, people say, oh, wow, you work for Google. Wow, I'll talk to you. The last 2 years, with all the AI stuff that's happening, and Google is at the very heart of it. They invented a lot of it. I mean, ChatGPT, the T, transformer technology, invented by Google. Huh?
But what is mine, right?
No, DeepMind was acquired, but then they developed that transformer technology based on the DeepMind knowledge. But they have fundamentally that capability. But all of the thunder was being stolen by Microsoft and OpenAI. And all of a sudden, the Google people said, my God, what is happening here? I mean, for 23 years, we would just say Google, and people said, oh, wow. Now people say, I work at Google, and they say, oh, we're so sorry for you. That must be terrible, You must feel horrible. And people say, what is happening? And there again, you see that after 23 years, Google now has to reinvent itself. They're a big tech, but they need a Phoenix moment to make it happen. Just like Microsoft had a Phoenix moment when Satya Nadella came on board. Meta, parent company of Facebook, is going through that. And about a year and a half ago, they said, we know it, we used to be in social media. We're not going to be the virtual reality company. And they even changed the name Meta to that. And then after, I think about 6 months, they realized, nope, not going to work. It's just, we made a bad choice. They pivoted and realized it wasn't working. The good thing is they still made so much money on social media. I mean, Instagram and Facebook is still so profitable, and the ad revenue goes to social media platforms that they could afford to pivot and be wrong. But now they are massively focused on artificial intelligence. And they have a different approach. They have an open source approach. Their large language model, Llama is open source. So we're not entirely sure how they're going to monetize that. But from a technology point of view, they have an amazing offering at the moment. And I wouldn't be surprised if Meta in the future becomes an AI company, but I'm certain it won't be a virtual reality company. Now, have you ever been to the headquarters of Facebook?
I want to. I'm planning to. But please tell me more about it.
Well, so if you go there in Menlo Park in Silicon Valley, the Facebook campus is famous because it has the traditional Silicon Valley campus style. But if you go there, there's a big sign that has the Facebook thumb in front of it. So you would drive in, thumb. Many people go there and take a picture. Do me a favor, if you're there, go to the back of the sign. Because on the back of the sign, you will see that originally that entire campus used to be the Sun Microsystems campus. And that sign, Sun Microsystems, is still on the back. And Sun Microsystems was like the most important tech company 25 years ago. And then boom, went down. And it was sold for scrap to Oracle in 2003 or 2004. When Zuckerberg bought that property, he said, no, keep that sign. Just paint a thumb in front of it. This is what I want my customers to see when they drive in. But the old Sun Microsystems, this is what I want my employees to see when they look at the window. What goes up could go down. And I think that's the healthy paranoia that Zuckerberg has that might be necessary for reinvention and giving a company like Meta a Phoenix moment.
This is so interesting. Tell me one thing, You're talking about, there are so many Phoenix opportunities, right? Is there a framework to find Phoenix opportunities? Number one. And with so many companies, pivoting and actually going too big, you are also talking about the concentration of powers, right? Where there will be some companies which will actually control everything because they are building the fundamental, in this case, the models, right? How do you think in this age, right? So this is very interesting when ChatGPT 4.0 launched. In fact, when ChatGPT 3.0 launched, there is a company called Chegg, which lost so much value in their company share. When ChatGPT 4.0 launched the same day, Duolingo lost around $3 million or $4 million in their market cap. Is it, and you're saying it's easier for family businesses or businesses which have cash cows, right? Which have some cash coming and, turning that opportunity, that problems, the challenge into opportunities. But how can young people do this? Is there still way of doing something this?
No. So there's a couple of questions combined.
Let's take the first one, which is
a framework for
identifying Phoenix opportunities.
And I don't think there's a framework to define it. I think there's a framework to make them happen. So when I've observed these phoenixes, I found a couple of things. First of all is you need to create a sense of urgency without scaring people. If you're running a big company, a traditional company, and you feel the need for reinvention, you feel that there's a phoenix moment rapidly approaching, then you need to build that sense of urgency. So many companies have failed, have become irrelevant, have basically been able not to reinvent themselves because there was not that sense of urgency. All the big examples, whether it's Kodak or, all these companies that were at the top of their game, they just didn't have the sense of urgency. But very important, you need a sense of urgency.
Without panic.
Without panic. And that is a delicate thing to do. It's very easy to scare people, right? It's easy now these days with all the changes that are happening. You scare the living daylights out of your employees. You don't want that. But how do you build a sense of urgency without panic? Number two, you need to find a way to, when you're doing a phoenix, to combine the old and the new. The worst thing to say is, well, our old ways are dead. New is the future. Old bad, new good. Then you polarize the entire company and you're only going to make it worse. That's what Walmart almost did. They said, old retail dead, new retail, we're going to buy Jet.com. Almost killed them. No, what you have to do is say, listen, we're going to take our values, we're going to take our legacy, and we're going to find ways to combine old and new where we can really leverage our capabilities into that new realm. With Walmart, it basically, for example, meant that they said, we're going to put e-commerce into our stores. We're going to make sure that you can order online, pick it up in a Walmart store. You buy something online, we deliver it to your house, but you bring it back to a Walmart, and we find mechanisms to make it work, old and new combined. The third thing, and maybe the most important thing that I have seen, is that in every type of opportunity of reinvention, you're going to have innovators, and you're going to have the classic, rest of the organization. And the problem is, as a leader, what you have to do is you have to find mechanisms to shelter the innovators, but keep them still close together to the organization. The worst thing to do is to say, we're going to put the innovators far away from the mothership because then they will invent something, but it will never impact the mothership. But if you put the innovators just there, they're going to lose all their energy fighting the old guard. You have to find these mechanisms to make that happen. And that is an organizational, cultural mindset, but a very important time. It probably means that if you look at resources in a company, 99% are still going to be the old resources. The innovators might just take up 1%. But you as a leader are going to have to spend a disproportional amount of energy and time on that. Because if you don't do that, you will never achieve the Phoenix opportunity. So there is certainly plenty of mechanisms or patterns that I've now seen, which are a classic case of how to make these Phoenixes work.
Can you give us those patterns and how do you balance those integrate things in the first and the second thing? How do you balance creating a sense of urgency without, scaring? How do you do that? Give me one or two examples or give me one or two actionable items.
Well, I'll take Microsoft as an example, right? So when Satya Nadella came on board and he said, listen, we are going to have to accept a new world. We used to be the monopolist. We had control. But honestly, we now have to acknowledge that in some cases, we're not even relevant anymore. Microsoft hated Apple, and it was a notorious story that Bill Gates didn't allow his wife to have an iPad. And Satya Nadella said, we're going to stop being silly. We're going to stop ignoring that Apple is there and that people love Apple. And one of the first things he did is he actually said, you know what? We're going to put Office onto the iPad because it would be foolish not to do that. And what was interesting is he took the company along in accepting a new reality. But he didn't say, oh my God, we're all going to die because we're not relevant anymore. He said, no, we have an opportunity to reinvent ourselves. He then took the entire company to the cloud. That was a bold move. At that moment, only Amazon had built the cloud. And Microsoft was kind of late to the game. But Satya was brilliant enough to realize, you know what? We're going to have to make sure that we give this all the opportunities. What many people don't realize is during that period, he fired 14% of the people that worked at Microsoft. And who did he fire? A lot of middle managers who had grown in the old realm and were actually defending the old realm and not approaching the new one. So Satya realized he had to make some big organizational changes in order to make it happen. But what he didn't do is say, old is bad, good is new. He combined it. He said, we're going to take all our Office products and move them into the cloud, Office 365. We're going to take our server products and turn that into our cloud business. So you can see a lot of these patterns materialize. But in my book, I describe these patterns in great detail. Not every phoenix is the same, but you can clearly see that there are quite a lot of similarities out there.
Let's talk about future, boss. Oh. Tell me one thing that has shocked you in you're an observer of innovation, disruption, and technology. What is something that has really shocked you in the recent times?
I am still at heart extremely excited about what technology and innovation does. I mean, that is my engineer's heart, I think. I mean, I see the potential of technology and what it could do, and I'm still like a kid in a candy store. AI was brilliant for me to observe because I have seen that technology, and studied it 30 years ago and seen it grow. And then all of a sudden it becomes mainstream, and I'm just so very happy about it. What I have found really difficult to accept is that the purity of these solutions, the amazing things that we can do, suddenly turn into the complexity of geopolitics and power play. When you look at the world of technology, I mean, I have seen 4 big movements in my career.
The WWW?
The World Wide Web, smartphone, 2007, the cloud, which I think is a game changer, and now AI. Those are the 4 big ones that I've seen. And when you look at the World Wide Web, I mean, what we had in many countries were brilliant ideas, platforms, social media, for example. But what happened over time is a complete concentration of that with US big tech. In Europe, we have no social media players at scale. Similar in India, yeah. When you look at smartphone, I remember when I was young, Europe was a very innovative area. We had companies like Ericsson and Siemens and Nokia. And now, I mean, you have 2 companies in the world which control smartphones, which is Android, owned by Google, and iOS by Apple. And these are 2 companies that are 12 miles from each other in Silicon Valley. And they control 99%. And the only player that actually is now countering that is Huawei, which was forced to because they couldn't use Android anymore. When you look at the cloud, maybe that is the biggest power play I have ever seen, because the cloud is amazing, because once you move your data into the cloud, the opportunities are endless, but it's also a lock-in environment, because getting your entire data to the cloud is a big journey. Getting them out, it's very similar to, if you have a house and you have an attic, if you drag something to your attic, you're never, ever taking it out again. I mean, you never clean up your attic. You're never going to do that. I mean, it's your kids who are going to have to do that the moment that you pass away. But now in the cloud business, in Europe, for example, we have no European hyperscaler. We have Amazon, we have Google, and we have Azure. And there are 3 players. The only alternative we have is in Asia, where, for example, Alibaba has a big cloud. Most Chinese companies use Ali Cloud. But you see that you're seeing a polarization. Concentration. I was blown away. So we had the AI Safety Summit in Bletchley Park last November. All the top thinkers and politicians came to Bletchley Park in the UK to think about AI safety. That very same week, we had the first White House executive order on artificial intelligence.
You were there?
No, but it was just a statement issued by the White House where they said, we, the US, are the dominant force in artificial intelligence, and we will do everything in our power to remain the dominant force. And one of the things they did is they rolled out the red carpet for AI researchers from all around the world to become US citizens, because they realized that of all the researchers working on AI in the US, only more than 75% did not get their degree in the US. So they don't have the talent. At this moment, the US is actively recruiting researchers in Europe, for example, to become US citizens and to work on, that national AI. And that is something which is bothering me, is something that I don't have a clear answer to, because honestly, AI is a power play. I mean, the amount of resources, capacity you need to train large language models is insane. That's why companies like Amazon are investing tens of billions of dollars every year in data centers to run AI. And there is no way we can catch up in Europe, for example, because, we can't do AI if we don't have the data centers, and the data centers are owned by, and now, where am I going to find $200 billion to build AI data centers? It's not going to happen. And I think this is where India is in a very interesting situation, because there is certainly talent density. I've lost track of the amount of engineers graduating in India every year, but I think it's around 2.6, 2.7 million.
Yes.
If you look at it, China is at 4.9 million. The amount of STEM graduates in the US is less than 500,000. So if you compare the US to China, there's almost a 10x difference in STEM graduates. If these are the soldiers in your new Cold War, then there is something that is going to have a very unhappy ending. So I had never thought that when I was getting older, that the world would polarize even more. I had this naive idea when I started reading the newspaper. I don't know, must have been 10, 11 years old. I remember reading the newspaper when I was 10 years, and I thought, oh my God, the world is screwed. The world is terrible. There's one misery after another. Thank God, by the time I'm old, we will have solved all that. That was the stupidest, most naive thought I ever had. And today, what I actually see is where technology has the power to make the world a better place. It's actually polarizing the world more than ever. And the geopolitical forces that are now being unlocked in this technology war, and certainly in the AI, that is something that I wouldn't say frightens me, but certainly saddens me.
So today after the session, I completely understand you are the man who understands AI perfectly, right? And the way that you gave the entire history, the current, scenario, help me understand that if a young person is watching this, how can I leverage this AI opportunity? Number one, or maybe number two. Number one would be, how are you so sure that AI is not going to be the self-driving car movement, but is actually going to be a,
Well, as you know, AI has gone through ups and downs over its 70-year history.
They famously say that AI was the forgotten science of a child of computer science, right? And suddenly,
boof, boof. And I think what is fascinating there is that there are a number of reasons why we've had these, downward moments. But I think at a certain moment, you see that I think we're now in a situation where we're putting so much computing power together that it has escape velocity. It's almost like the space race. You try, keeps falling down. At a certain moment, you have enough power, boof, you can go out of orbit. I think we're now in that position. So I really believe that I'm fortunate in a way that I'm here to observe that and to witness that and to be very much part of that. And I get very excited about that. To go back to your second question, is I think this is going to become almost like the standard way of doing business. I mean, I remember 25 years ago when I still had to explain to people what digital was or online was. I mean, honestly, I did that, right? And now digital has lost all meaning. It's just normal. It's the way that you do things. I always make the joke, if you put a camera on the table and you ask it, what is it? Older people say, oh, this is a digital camera. I mean, my kids say, it's a camera, because they've never seen an analog camera in their life. Huh? I mean, the adjective digital has lost all meaning because it's become normal. I think we're seeing the same with AI. This is something that you have to understand, because it's going to be the standard way of, working in the future. And if you are somebody who sees potential in that, first of all, you need to understand the technology, or at least have somebody in your team that really understands technology. There are, of the 100 people in AI, I think 90 who honestly don't really get it. And there's 10% that really understand. You need to get connected to that, because there's so much hype. You need to be able to separate hype from reality. The second thing is you have to understand the dynamics of, how to leverage data. I mean, we're living in a world where data is, the oil. I mean, that is the way to weaponize AI. And data means that you have to understand sourcing and quality and control and governance. And there's a whole science around data that I think is now essential. When I teach at the London Business School and I look at the curriculum of the MBA program, I always say when I'm there, I say, well, I'm very pleased to be here, and I want to congratulate you, the MBA students, on choosing the best education for the last century. But things like data science and data literacy should be taught in an MBA, because they are the very foundations if you want to understand that. And the third thing I would like to say is that I think the power of AI to be a force of disruption in many markets, in many business models, is absolutely there. And if you want to figure that out, I think there's tremendous potential in making that happen.
So this is the rapid fire round. You can take time in thinking the answer, but you have to answer in one word or one sentence.
Okay.
One startup that you have invested in that you feel that can be the next unicorn.
It's a company called Perlego. They are basically the Spotify for textbooks.
Your favorite professor at Belgium, the university where you studied, and at LBS?
My favorite in Belgium was probably my mathematics teacher in high school, because he actually showed me the beauty of mathematics. My favorite professor at London Business School is Professor Kostas Markides. He is a brilliant strategy professor, and I've worked with him on many occasions, and he is fabulous.
He still teaches there?
Oh, yeah. Well,
give me one prediction about, future. If we watch this, let's say 10 years down the lane, how do you think the future would be? Do you have any sense, any prediction? Because, you wrote this book called The New Normal, and there were certain things which became true, right? Tell me one thing that you think will happen.
So one thing that I'm absolutely sure of is that maybe I have to take the time frame 10 to 20 years, is the number one thing that will change dramatically is healthcare. We are the last generation that knows so little about our bodies. And I think the transformative potential of AI in healthcare is going to blow us away.
Give me one example of that.
I'll give a very simple example, is that we now see a lot of AI being used for protein folding to discover the next drugs that could cure diseases, but also things like smartwatches that monitor our heartbeats. Our entire life could transform how we think about heart disease.
So this is very interesting because, I'm not sure how true is this, but I really saw one article where there is an AI model which can detect breast cancer maybe 4 years before.
Yep.
So if those kind of technology become permissive, how much do you think, what will be the average lifespan of a human being after 20 years?
I honestly hope that it's not going to increase too much, because I believe that it's more important to have quality lives than necessarily longer lives, because we already have too many people on this planet.
This is very interesting thought. What will happen to the population, right? Once, AI increases the productivity and there will be some kind of, do you think will be in terms of resources, once AI is there, we will be in an abundance or we will be in a scarcity? What is your thought about it?
I'm a firm believer in abundance. And I think this is why I really believe that AI is a force for good, but we have to be very careful. And I think we have to be, conscious of the fact that AI is also consuming a lot of resources. And we have to find ways to really put AI to good, because honestly, just helping us write our science essays or our papers, that's not the best use of artificial intelligence.
A couple of quick ones, right? You mentioned there are very less people who understand AI, right? In today's world, give me 3 or 4 names of people who really understand the AI. This can be, as far as Sam Altman, or it can be folks at LBS, it can be folks that you know of, it can be folks that you're reading, whatever. But give me 2, 3, 4, 5 names of people who really understand so that we can try to associate ourselves, we can read their books and works.
I think following Sam Altman is a really good idea. I'm not sure he is the best technological expert, but he certainly understands the politics of AI very, very well. Mustafa Suleyman, the co-founder of DeepMind, who now runs AI at Microsoft, is brilliant, and his book, The Coming Wave, is an absolute must-read.
Sure. Any third name?
Ilya Sutskever, who was the chief scientist of OpenAI.
He started new company in education space, if I'm not wrong, yeah.
In the security of AI and the governance of AI, I think Ilya is also somebody that is somebody to actually watch. And a fourth one would be Peter Abel. He is the professor of AI at Berkeley. Absolutely brilliant to follow as well.
Got it. Tell me one thing that you're teaching your kids.
I think our kids are 20 and 25, so there is less to teach. But if there's 3 things that we focused on, it's creativity, it's curiosity, and critical thinking.
Interesting. This is going to be very hard, I don't know. But if you were to sum up everything that you teach at LBS in one line, one sentence, what is that? It can be 2 sentences also, or 3 sentences. But if you have to sum up everything that you teach at LBS in a couple of lines, what those 1, 2, 3 lines would be?
The 3 lines would be is number 1, innovation is a mindset. Number 2 is reinvention is possible. And number 3 is it's all about leadership.
This is so insane. I have so many things, but I'll respect your time. Thanks a ton for doing this. I'm genuinely grateful. And I hope that whenever you are in India next time, and if you really want to see, the country, I would love to, show you around in whatever smallest way.
It would be a pleasure.
Yes. Thanks a ton. Really grateful.
Thank you very much.